Back in my 9th grade year, I had unwillingly befriended someone I really wish I had avoided. Let me start this off with some background information. I don't know if it's like this for all schools, but basically, we're assigned a school based on what zone we live in. During my middle school years, we moved, and I was meant to change schools, but I was given the chance to stay as long as I went to the proper high school later. The time came, and I went to the correct high school while everyone I knew went to the other. I was pretty much the new girl in town. I had tried out for these special scientific classes, and I finally made it in. One of the big things for this class was team building, so it was pretty much tradition that every year there was a mini camping trip to get to know our peers. I remember very well that everyone had already known each other since they had come from the same school. When the trip day arrived, my classmates scrambled onto the bus and I hung back a bit. By the time I worked up the courage to enter, there was only one more seat available that everyone had avoided. Looking back now, I realized it was because of him. I sat down, and there was a boy there. He was short and thin, totally non-threatening looking. He seemed relieved that someone had sat next to him, but said nothing for a long while. An hour later, he had finally decided to try and talk with me. It was small talk, slightly forced on my end, simply because talking to new people makes me uncomfortable. Eventually, we moved on to play Never Have I Ever. At first it was fun, but with each question it got more and more personal. The game ended, and we sat mostly in silence until I fell asleep. When I woke up, I realized he had rested his head on my shoulder. Naturally, I pushed him off, and nothing more was said. Sometime later, we got off and were at the camp. I began to notice that he'd follow me. If I did any camp activities, he was by my side at all times. It was difficult for me to make friends with this weird guy following me around everywhere. I had finally connected with a few of the girls, though, and I stuck mostly by them. One event that struck odd with me was when we went swimming in the lake. We wanted to go in to shower afterwards, but he wanted to come with me too. We told him not to, and as we walked, he trailed along behind us. We actually began pleading for him to just go away. It took a teacher to catch on to our conversation for him to finally leave us alone. After the trip, only a few things stuck out on his creepy mannerisms. He clung to our group of girls, and despite our annoyance, we didn't want to be cruel and send away someone who was clearly mentally troubled. I remember one time I was inviting them over for a sleepover, and he was angry that he wasn't invited to come, stating that I was sexist. In fact, whenever I showed any interest to another guy, that was always his go-to insult. He would purposely try to ruin possible relationships for me. He was also heavily jealous of my brother. My brother, seriously. One event was the last straw. It was the morning time before class started, so I waited in the cafeteria with some friends. He came up to me with a lot of purpose in his step and asked me to come with him somewhere. I don't know where to, but I didn't want to go with him and flat out refused. His response? He marched around the table for 5 minutes. No pauses, nothing. It literally took another student to tell him to leave me alone. That student then told me he had done it to her too. I was shocked, honestly. She told me it would only get worse if I didn't stop him right now, so that's what I did. I told him to leave me alone, and that if he didn't I would report him for harassment. And then it was over. But at the same time, it wasn't. I don't recall any creepy behavior happening in 10th grade, but then this year marched in. I was kicked out of the special science class after having a nervous breakdown and failing math, and placed in a CP Algebra 2 class. I walked in, and who do I see? Him, of course. He stares at me and smiles. I sat down a few rows away, close to the front, and I can feel his stare on my back. The first week passes with no problem. He interjects in class a lot, and corrects the teacher, but nothing to me. Then I heard him talking to himself, whispering. When called out by another student, they joked, and all was well, it seemed. He said something else that was inaudible to me. I was later told it was a school shooting joke, and then he said a little louder, intended for me to hear, that he was going to get his revenge on the people who had wronged him. I didn't report him. I was hoping I had heard him wrong. Somebody else did, though. He was suspended for a week and moved out of my math class. When he came back, he watched me and my boyfriend. Told anyone who would listen that I was fake or that he opened me up to people. I later found out he openly blamed me for a suspension, and the staring still continues. In fact, I caught him today and yesterday doing it. This happened when I was about 13 years old, and I still think about it today. My friend Jackie and I were extremely mischievous children. We loved joking around, sometimes using extreme measures to pull the best pranks. I can remember climbing a neighbor's tree with her and devising a rope and pulley system with a basket and water balloons to get the balloons on the top of the tree. We would throw them at the neighborhood boys without being detected or retaliated against. Sometimes we would do mildly dangerous things to get a good rush, but it was never serious, just harmless messing around. One night, Jackie came over for a sleepover. We ate a bunch of candy and talked about boys, and then we got bored. It was around 1 a.m, and we were hyped off the sugar so we couldn't sleep. One of us mentioned that we wished our other friend, Bailey, was there to hang out with. And then I got the most brilliant idea of the evening. The two of us should sneak out of my house, walk over to Bailey's, and then TP her front tree. Now, for those of you who don't know what TPing is, it means toilet papering. You know how the douchey frat boys in college sometimes throw toilet paper all over other fraternity houses to show dominance or something? And that's what I wanted to do. She, of course, thought it was a brilliant idea. So we stuffed a bunch of rolls of toilet paper into 2 large purses, put on some sneakers, and then sneaked downstairs and out my back door. It was a summer night, so not too cold, which was good, because we were wearing tank tops and PJ shorts. The walk to her house was half through neighborhoods, and half through a long stretch of road next to a golf course, with the neighborhood at the very end of it. Bailey's house was a little under a mile away, so we began hustling so that we could get there faster, and maybe tap on her window to get her to hang out if she wasn't asleep. We began walking, at first nervous that my parents would catch us, and then confident that they wouldn't. We began giggling and talking about boys again. Now, I'm sure that most people reading this will think we were very stupid, and we were, but you have to understand the context of the situation. My hometown is very quiet. Nobody goes outside after 8 o'clock at night. It was ranked in the top 5 safest cities in the United States. Nothing bad ever happens there, or at least nothing that we knew about at that age. We had up until that point thankfully never had the opportunity to be afraid of walking alone, or at night growing up. So with that in mind, we figured we had nothing to worry about. We kept chattering as we crossed the residential area into the golf course, and didn't miss a beat in doing so. Suddenly, an SUV lazily rode up going the opposite way of us. I can still remember it like it happened a few minutes ago instead of years. The SUV was large, red and 4-doored, with a middle-aged man driving. He slowed down as he approached us and rolled down his windows. "Hey, girlies. What are you doing up so late at night?" He had a huge mouth with perfect straight white teeth, and he would have been handsome if he hadn't been so strange. "Nothing?" He raised his eyebrows at that. "Nothing? All by yourselves? Well, that's pretty dangerous." He smiled again, and this time even wider, and I could for the first time in my life feel fear ripple through me like a wave. "We're walking to my dad's house. He's waiting for us." Silence crept between the car and us. I had lied, and he knew it. He looked at me and then at Jackie. For a minute, I actually convinced myself that maybe he was just a very, very creepy, nosy neighbor. but there was something so wrong with him. He took his time replying, twisting the words around in his mouth like he was tying a cherry stem into a knot. "That's interesting. You're so young to be out so late and wearing that. You better hurry home to him before it's too late." The air stood still. The only thing keeping me from bolting was Jackie by my side. I couldn't see her face because I was locking eyes with the smiling man, so I wasn't sure if she had heard what I heard too. Too late? Too late at night, or too late for what? I didn't want to know, and I was certain that if we were somehow separated, things would go very, very badly. I thought quickly. He was on the other side of the road. He would have to go a distance to get to us. I tore my eyes from his and risked a quick glance at Jackie, and Jackie wasn't moving either. She was looking at me with wide eyes as if I would somehow know what to do, so I pretended that I did. "Thank you, sir. Have a good night." I grabbed Jackie's hand and marched down the sideway away from him in what I hoped was a confident way. His SUV lingered behind us, unmoving. We kept walking, gripping hands covered in sweat together, as if it was the only thing keeping us from certain death. Our footsteps made empty, hollow noises down the deserted sidewalk. My ears were in sonar mode, listening for something, anything. A car door opening, a man's voice. But I refused to turn around and give him the satisfaction of knowing I was afraid. I didn't want him to know that we were. Suddenly a car screeched into gear, and we heard him peel down the asphalt. We started running, and as we ran, we both looked behind our shoulders. He had driven off in the opposite way, away from us. We didn't slow down, though. Eventually we could see where the edge of the golf course ended, and in the distance where a sleepy neighborhood of houses began. It was a ways away, but it symbolized safety to us, so we slowed down. We walked in tense silence for a while. I looked at Jackie's face and her jaw was clenched, and she looked at me. "That guy." "Yeah?" "What do you think he wanted?" "You know what he wanted." "Yeah, I was hoping you'd say you knew him." And the sound of a car booking it down the road came from behind us. We both turned at the same time to see the man in the red SUV, now on our side of the road and coming straight for us. Neither of us moved. I think we were paralyzed with fear. He jerked to a stop right next to us and began to get out of the car. "Run!" I shouted. We tore down the sidewalk towards the houses. The smiling man started shouting something at us, but I couldn't catch what he was saying, and I wasn't about to turn around and try to find out. The houses were getting closer, but he had gotten back into his SUV and was following us, shouting things out the window. There was a corner coming up, and we heard the SUV stop and then him get out and start running after us. "That way." We turned the corner into the neighborhood, but there was nowhere to go. It was 1 a.m. No one was awake. We didn't know any of the people who lived in these houses, and by the time someone woke up to open the door, he would catch us. But the first house on the street had a low fence. I pointed to it and didn't even have to say a word to her. We both hopped in and stumbled into a stranger's backyard. They had a dog. Luckily it didn't attack us, but unluckily it began barking. We sprinted across the yard and quickly hopped their fence into the neighboring one, and hid behind a bush in a temporary pool in the back. The dog in the yard over kept barking. From a hole in the bush, we could see through the wrought iron fence out into the street. Nothing. And then a voice. "I know you're here, girlies." And we could hear him walking around, but we couldn't see him. A gate rustled, and the neighbor's dog barked even louder. He was looking for us in the first yard that we had gone into. He said something else, but we couldn't understand him, and then we didn't hear from him for a long time. A shadow appeared through the iron fence. The neighbor's dog. It had been let out of its backyard, and had wandered past the one we were in. For all we knew, he knew exactly where we were and was playing with us, so we didn't move. We sat silently in the bush for hours. As the night began to fade, and the early morning sun began to frame the edge of the hills, still dark but less so, we heard an engine rev. In horror, we watched the man in the red SUV slowly drive by through the fence in the yard we were hiding in, his face set, turning, searching, and still looking. And in that moment I knew why he had driven away the first time. He was giving us a head start. He was hunting us, and he didn't want the prey to go down too easy. It would have ruined his little game. And we sat in that bush until around 6:30 in the morning, when it was fully light out, and then we ran back to my place to hop in bed before my parents woke up. When we got to the house, I realized we still had all the toilet paper we had stolen from my kitchen cabinets in the bags. Jackie, since we never TP'd Bailey's house, let's TP mine. It has a better tree. Besides, my parents will never suspect it was us, 'cause who the fuck TP's their own house? It was true. The tree outside of my parents' house was a truly magnificent maple tree, and my parents would never guess that we were the culprits. But that's not why I wanted to TP it. I wanted to release all of the tension from the night before, and try to relax again. I wanted to pretend that we weren't almost kidnapped in the middle of the night, with no one ever knowing where we were, or why we had disappeared out of our beds without a trace. I just wanted to feel like a kid again. So we completely wrapped my enormous tree in toilet paper, throwing roll after roll up and around, and then hosing the entire thing for good measure, so it would be harder to get out and more authentic. We crept up the stairs and fell asleep, exhausted in my bed. Approximately half an hour later, my mom burst into my room screaming about someone TPing our house. And that was the end of our sleep, because my mom was sure that one of our annoying little friends did this. Jackie immediately remembered a mysterious obligation of babysitting for her brothers on a Saturday morning, and she had to go do it or else her mom would get mad. So I was stuck with my irate family combing through wet maple leaves and sopping wet, disgusting toilet paper for the afternoon. I learned 2 lessons that day. Don't TP your own house for obvious reasons, and don't walk anywhere at night. With a friend, alone, to pull a prank, to go on a run. Don't go, because you never know who might be out there waiting for an opportunity to hunt. Hey guys, I've wanted to post on this sub for a long time. Escaping harrowing situations with creeps, sociopaths, and other ne'er-do-wells is something I've had to do many times. This is only my second post ever on Reddit, and the first one got deleted, so please go easy on my old ass. This took place during the late summer of 1993. I was living in Montana, but had a boyfriend in British Columbia, and I often traveled between the two areas. We were broke and carless, so we hitchhiked when we needed to get somewhere further than biking distance. I had spent the month of August with him in BC, and eventually it was time to go back to school. I, of course, not having worked much all summer, had no money. My bum-ass boyfriend hadn't come through with any money for a bus ticket either. My parents were mad at me, so they weren't giving me any money. All my friends were broke, but we didn't have a phone to call them anyway. We were living in a 2-room cabin with no running water in the mountains. The only phone was a party line that belonged to the neighbors, and was basically only for emergencies. The decision was made. I was already 2 days late for school, and I didn't feel like panhandling just for a bus ticket. I had to get back, and couldn't wait for the boyfriend's money to materialize, so it would be my first time hitchhiking alone. I put my backpack's worth of stuff together, made sure I had my ID, because one time we hitched to the border, left Canada, and tried to get into the US before I realized I had left my ID in Canada, meaning I had none to enter the US, but also none to get back. But that's a story for another day. Things went surprisingly smoothly for the majority of the trip. An elderly couple picked me up as soon as I got off the mountain and into town, and took me all the way to Creston, right near the border crossing. I walked across and was picked up almost immediately by a guy who at first gave me the mild creeps, but all he did was lecture me about how dangerous it was to hitchhike alone, and how I reminded him of his young daughter. He took me damn near half the trip. I was actually having phenomenal luck. I walked to just outside the city limits and stuck my thumb out. 1 hour went by, then 2. You're often walking really slowly when you're trying to catch a ride, and eventually I came across a small flap of cardboard. I picked it up, thinking I could walk off at the exit, borrow a marker at a gas station, and make a sign. I thought it might help me get a ride. So I'm walking along a little faster now, and suddenly I see something moving in my peripheral vision. I tense, look, and see that it's a 2-foot thin dark snake trying to get over the cement guardrail to the shoulder. He was never going to make it. He was kind of trying to throw himself over it sideways. I kind of happen to like snakes, and he looked pretty harmless, so I used my sign as a shovel and pitched him over the wall to help him. In hindsight, I should have realized the snake was probably a bad omen. Before I could reach the next exit, a car slowed to a stop. It's always creepy when a car stops and you're walking up to it, trying to judge if it's Ted Bundy or just an eccentric like you. My heart always sank a little when it would be a single man, but I soon realized he wasn't alone. There was a kid in the front seat who looked to be aged 10 to 13. The guy was a little too friendly, but what was he gonna do? Murder me in front of the kid? I was young and very dumb. I decided to get in. The man was pretty chatty, introducing the kid as his nephew. He said they were driving back to where they lived in St. Louis after visiting his brother in Seattle so the kid could visit his grandma. The kid barely even said a word. If I remember, and it's been a very long time, it's about 3 hours to where I lived. He was taking Highway 90 right past the city I lived in, so I was relieved I wouldn't have to get out of the car and thumb it again. The first hour goes by, and it's mostly friendly chit-chat. Lots of family anecdotes and general small talk. The switchblade my BF gave me was cradled in the bottom of my palm the whole time, up my sleeve and out of view, but I began to relax a little. He kept up the friendly chatter, but eventually the questions he was asking took a raunchier turn. Like, did I have a boyfriend? What was he like? What did we like to do, and what was our favorite position? What? I silently panicked, thinking that this guy was a creep after all. My instinct was to play along with this conversation while I tried to figure out what to do. I was pretty sure the drink he had in the console, in a convenience store cup, had more than pop in it, because you could see him physically getting looser as the drive went on. He kept asking gross questions, and I was so embarrassed for his nephew, but still playing along. I just tried to breathe deeply to keep myself from having an anxiety attack, and concentrated on extricating myself from his car. Eventually, he made it clear that he expected me to have sex with him in exchange for the ride. Door-to-door service, he said. Then it got worse. And find one of your girlfriends for my nephew, he said with this hyper-cheerful and menacing smile that made my stomach drop. Yeah, I had to get away from this guy ASAP. At this point, we were about 20 minutes from the town I lived in. I started making stuff up about a phantom hot slutty friend I had, and then it finally hit me what I could do to get away. I put on my best come-hither smile and said to him, "You know what? I bet she's home by now. Let's go straight over to her place when we get to town and get this date started." So I had him get off at my exit and asked if we could get some beer for our first date. In Montana, you could buy beer at gas stations, so I had him stop at a place a few blocks from where I lived. When he somewhat reluctantly went inside to buy beer, which I knew was in the back of the store, I opened my door and sprinted down the alley about a block and dove into a huge clump of bushes. Folded myself up as tight as I could and waited. I still had my knife, but now it was out of my sleeve. I was shaking, and my heart was pounding so hard I was afraid it would explode. I tucked my head into my knees and waited, listening for his car to come down the alley. When we had got to the gas station, it was about 4 p.m. in September, so there was still plenty of light. I stayed in those damn bushes until night fell, and then finally I sprinted home. His car never came down the alley, but I could hear him yelling for me, and he sounded pissed. I got in my front door, locked the deadbolt, and collapsed, dirt and little leaves all over me. My roommate asked what had happened to me, and I told her the abbreviated version. She asked me why I hadn't called, and told me she would have picked me up at the border. What is up, guys? Blue Spooky here, as always. I just wanted to thank you guys so much for watching, especially if you made it this far to the end of the video. If you guys enjoyed the video, please feel free to leave feedback in the comments below, as well as perhaps like, share, or subscribe if you feel so inclined. If you have a personal story that you'd like to submit, or you'd like to just send me a message, links to all of my social media will be in the description for the video below. This includes my Gmail, Twitter, and Facebook accounts. Go ahead and send me a message on any of those, and I'll try to get back to you as soon as possible. If you do decide to send in a story, please be sure to include in the tagline what the theme of the story is, if it has any, the name of the story, and how you would like to be credited in the description of the video the story appears in. If you're curious at all about the music used in this video, the music is always listed in the description below, in the order which it appears. I also have links to the artists and list the tracks by name, just in case you want to find more of their work. Last but not least, if you have any criticism, please be sure to leave it in the comments below, as I'm always looking for new ways to improve the channel. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I hope you guys have a great day.